Oh. Hello, everyone. Welcome to video number 4. The name of this video is Thinking English. Is it really possible? So, to begin with, let's have a look at the problem, today's problem regarding this title. So it says, students are often told think in English, but very few are ever told what actually that means or whether it is even possible. Most of the time we encourage our students and we tell and we share with our colleagues and we tell them that the main idea of learning a language is to think in that particular language. However, though, okay, most of the time when students start learning English, okay, and when they study English, they usually translate word by word in their heads. A second aspect is that they usually freeze when speaking. And then the next aspect that is also relevant to consider is the fact that most of the time students feel that they are thinking in Spanish first. At the same time, teachers most of the time have their students repeat phrases and they insist on telling their students that they must think in English as a goal, but without implementing specific techniques or without a direct or a very specific method. So, is thinking in English, and this is the crucial question here, the key point here is thinking in English a real cognitive ability or just a teaching myth? Well, let's have a look and let's explore what psycholinguistics says regarding this issue. So, firstly, the brain does not switch languages like a button. That's not true. Second of all, there are parallel systems for L1 and L2 according to contemporary bilingual models such as Kroll and Stewart model. At at early stages, most of the time, learning a second language depends heavily on your first language or on L1. So most of the time, people translate as a mediation tool. At advanced stages, though, direct access to meaning in L2 becomes a real possibility. Okay, so this is possible as you keep on improving your English, and as your English becomes more advanced, it is possible for you to become more proficient in the language, and at the same time, you avoid translating literally from your mother tongue. So the key idea here is thinking in English is not an on-off switch. It is a gradual reduction of L1 mediation. That's a fact. This is also supported by theories such as the usage-based theories that state that language becomes automatic through repeated exposure. So getting exposed to the language is crucial. Second of all, connectionist models that also state that neural networks strengthen direct pathways with use. So the more you practice and the more you use English, then the more spontaneous, automatic the process becomes. So the final takeaway from this video is thinking in English is not or shouldn't be a goal because thinking in English is an emergent process. It happens as you continue learning the language and practicing the language and as you become more exposed to that target language. So the real classroom problem here is now connecting, theory with the teaching reality in foreign contexts such as the one in Chile, as the context we face. Teaching is often translation based. So most of the time we have students translate sentences out of context, and then also grammar is taught in isolation. Students most of the time have limited input or meaningful input, and speaking practice becomes too late or too rarely in a classroom setting. So the result is students know English, but they don't know how to use it. And they can't process it automatically, which is the key goal when learning and should be the key goal when learning the language. So in our context, most of the time we are teaching English as a subject, and not as a thinking system. We don't have our students to think in the language, and we don't give them the possibility, and we don't give them opportunities for them to practice the language in real contexts. So how to develop thinking in English and how thinking in English actually develops. Here you have some strategies, and I explain the process throughout. Students become more proficient in the language, and therefore they start thinking in the language. So the first stage, naturally, students will go and will turn into translating sentences literally from their first language. That's the conscious translation, the beginner stage. Then they start using memorized phrases, chunks, as we mentioned in previous videos. Then you can have your students, and you can encourage your students to use guided thinking in simple structures, such as I want, I need. So they start apprehending structures as they continue learning the language. Then you can show evidence of partial automation, okay? And then finally, there's direct access to meaning in L2, which is the last stage in which you, after you practice and you are exposed to the language and you apprehend and you start connecting, making connections, neural connections between visual stimuli and then also linguistic input and linguistic output and exposure. As you start connecting new phrases, chunks with phrases, context in which you use them, then you start processing the language more automatically and therefore using the language in real context. And you start thinking in the language because you start thinking in phrases, chunks that can help you fulfill specific linguistic goals rather than translating word for word. Thinking in English then emerges when enough chunks become automatic. These are some examples of chunks. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, it depends on, actually, these become cognitive shortcuts. Okay, so instead of spending a lot of time teaching in class prepositions, the present simple, and then structures, and what I mean actually means, or the meaning in Spanish, have the students use these expressions automatically, spontaneously, while sharing these ideas. This is an example of a practical classroom strategy you can implement to have your students think in the language. This is called no translation thinking loop. Present a visual situation. It could be probably a cafeteria, a classroom, maybe an airport, a street scene. Rule number two, step number two, the rule is no translation allowed. So you can have your students respond only using simple structures. And you can write them on the board or project them if you're using a PPT presentation. And you can present, I see, there is, I think, maybe. And then step number four, repeat with gradual expansion. The goal of this activity, which is quite simple, visual stimuli, and have the students use chunks and expressions to share their ideas on spot, on site. Then the main goal of this technique or classroom strategy is the fact that students will reduce dependence on Spanish and they can build automatic responses. A second technique I can share with you is called the inner speech training. 1 minute daily mental English narration, in which the students can, you can actually time this activity. You can have the students describe actions in real time. I'm opening the door, I'm drinking coffee, I'm thinking about my day. If you are talking about routines, for example, in the class, you can have their students use their timers and speak for 30 seconds about the topic or the learning objective that they are dealing with in the classroom setting. By doing that, and they can do that in groups, in pairs, you can pair them up and then share their ideas. Because of the timing variable, then they will be not forced, but they will encourage to use the language spontaneously and to think in the language. So remember, at the end of the day, the reflection, this is the reflection for all teachers watching this video. The key message here is do not think in English as an empty instruction. Okay? Implement activities that will help the students use the language effectively. Design environments where English is necessary for thinking, and prioritize input, chunks, and interaction over translation. At the end of the day, we don't teach students to think in English. That hasn't been confirmed by research studies. What we can do is to create conditions where thinking in English becomes inevitable. Now, if you're a researcher, this is food for thoughts for those people carrying out research studies in psycholinguistics and people who are interested, researchers who are interested in this topic. These are some research questions that you can attempt to address in your research studies. Question number one is, how much input is needed to reduce L1 mediation? Which types of chunks accelerate cognitive fluency in L2? What role does emotion play in psycholanguage processing? Is L2 cognitive processing different across typologically distant languages? These are some questions that you can use. I strongly advise you to have a look at Van Patten's work on psycholanguage theories that can help you, of course, um, explore contemporary and updated research regarding this issue. Now, maybe the real question here is not whether we can think in English. The real question is how language reshapes, and this is what we should be exploring and we should be interested in, how language reshapes the way we think itself. So if you've liked this video, I invite and I encourage each of you to firstly like this video, secondly subscribe to my channel, to my YouTube channel, and turn on notifications because I'll be watching more videos regarding artificial intelligence and language learning platforms that can help you improve in the language, and more techniques, classroom practices. As I mentioned in the introduction to my channel, in each video, you will find a problematic situation, the content you need, techniques if you happen to be an EFL teacher, and finally, the last but not least, if you're a researcher, you will find interesting questions that you can address and that can be turned into practical action research studies or empirical or quasi-experimental studies at your discretion. So I also invite each of you to join the live sessions, which are coming shortly, in which we can connect live and discuss some of the contents from the videos, share your views on the topic, because your opinion matters. So let's learn, discuss, and grow together. Thank you for watching. Bye.